Yesterday, Sayadaw spoke about Samatha Jhana and Vipassana Jhana. And among these two, he talked about Samatha Jhana, neither too little nor too much, just a moderate amount, in terms of both theory and practice. If he were going to go into Samatha Jhana, he would have to speak quite a long time. But as this is, the Vipassana is our main objective now, he must keep his remarks about Samatha brief. So Vipassana is the observation of true nature, the true nature or individual and common characteristics of nama and rupa, mind and matter, which are really there when they happen, when they arise. These are, Vipassana observes these. When we observe sabhava, or true nature, stage by stage, one comes to know the individual characteristics of the objects, as well as the common characteristics, how the object arises and then passes away. Because it arises and then passes away, it is not good. And it's just process. It has no inherent self. So every single bit of rupa and nama, matter and mind, has these common characteristics. So every individual characteristic that one can observe has these common characteristics. So there's no need for us to have the objective of observing the common characteristics, because these become apparent through observing the individual characteristics. So we just work with trying to observe the individual characteristics of nama and rupa. And at first, we don't see these distinctly. They are mixed up with the actions or positions that the body is in. For example, rising or falling, lifting, moving, placing, bending, stretching, blinking the eyes, opening and closing them. All of these are called akara in Pali, or they can be called positions or manner. And at first, what we observe, we have to focus on. At first, we have to note the objects mixed up with this akara, their position or manner, as these things happen, as the actions happen. So we apply ardent effort. As soon as the rising arises, we put our mind on the abdomen, and we can't be casual about it. And we also have to incline the mind towards observing that object. So we have to be alert and active. And we have to apply ardent effort. But because we are trying to develop Vipassana Jhana, we also need aiming. The quality of making the object in focus. Aiming is what makes our mind see accurately. So these two factors of ardent effort and aiming have to be there. And at first, that is all that there is. That is all we can do, is apply these two. We aim the mind and we apply ardent effort to get the mind to reach the object. So this is done to develop Vipassana Jhana at first. And then later, when the mind is falling collectedly on the object, observing the rising and the falling, the jhana becomes focused. This focused observation of jhana becomes unified on the object, and one begins to develop knowledge. So today, Sayadaw will speak about how in order for Vipassana Jhana to arise, Khanika Samadhi is needed. Samatha Samadhi, or Samadhi Jhana, has Paṇḍitā Samadhi. One inclines the mind to a conceptual object that one chooses, and the mind, one puts the mind on this object without a break. This is the meaning of the prefix pa in Paṇḍitā. It's samadhi, it's putting the mind on this object without a break. So with Paṇḍitā Samadhi, we put the mind on an object that is not really there. It is concept. It is not ultimate reality or paramattha. So this is Paṇḍitā Samadhi. And at present we are developing Khanika Samadhi. And this is described in the text as Khanika Chitta Ekagata. So this means that it's the one-pointedness of mind occurring every moment, or every second, or every minute. So this, it occurs on the arising object, whether it's the rising or the falling, sitting or touching. The one-pointedness of mind on that object for that moment is called Khanika Chitta. And the texts explain this as Kanamata Titiko Samadhi. That means that it is established just a moment, for example, every second. It's stability of mind, that's the meaning of samadhi, that is established for just a moment. And this is momentary samadhi, the mind falling collectedly on the object. So it is called Khanika Samadhi. The word that the Buddha used, Khanika Cetekagata, was explained as Kanamata Titiko Samadhi. So one knows something about the nature of it from this, but if one doesn't describe its power, then one won't know. So in terms of Paṇḍitā Samadhi, Sayadaw mentioned this yesterday. So it's Khanika Samadhi is explained in comparison to this. And so in the text it says that this Khanika Samadhi is also samadhi. This Khanika Samadhi falls collectedly on every arising object that is observed, whether it's the rising, the falling, sitting, touching, bending, stretching, blinking the eyes, opening and closing them. Every object one observes, Khanika Samadhi falls on that object. So it said, Sopi aramane nirantarang pavatamano. It occurs by saying Sopi. It means this Khanika Samadhi too falls collectively on the object. So this means that it's not only Paṇḍitā Samadhi that falls collectively on the object, Khanika Samadhi does also. So Khanika Samadhi, when the bhavana mind is developed, Khanika Samadhi makes this mind stable so that it doesn't shake. So not only Paṇḍitā Samadhi has the ability to place the mind in a stable way, one pointedly on the object. But Khanika Samadhi can do this too. So how is it that the mind is placed on the object? Like what? So it said apito viya. So when we practice samatha, the mind falls without a break on the object that we select. So we develop, first of all, neighborhood concentration, upachara samadhi, and we collect the mind on the object. And when this becomes good, the samadhi has momentum or force, and it develops into apana samadhi. What does and so it's something that, So when it becomes apana samadhi, it can't be disturbed. The mind is focused on the object of concentration without disturbance from the nivaranas. So this apana jhana is samatha jhana. And Khanika Samadhi also makes the mind so that it can't be disturbed by the nivaranas, so that the mind is occurring on the object with strong momentum, just the way as when one develops worldly jhanas and reaches the type of concentration that is called apana samadhi. So it can be gathered from this Pali that says apito viya, that samatha jhana and Vipassana jhana, or this samatha samadhi and Khanika samadhi, have the same ability with respect to worldly objects. Like apana samadhi, Khanika samadhi occurs without a break on the object. The word in Pali is nirantarang. There's no break, there's no gap in its occurrence on the object. So how is it that this happens? The word is used pavatamano. So pavata is a word for something that is like a stream of water flowing. When a stream of water flowing, it is continuous. So the full word is pavatamano, which is the present participle. That means that only when and only if the Khanika Samadhi is flowing like a stream, occurring like a stream continuously, can it make the mind calm without any disturbances from the nivaranas, or obstacles to concentration. Where is it that this Khanika Samadhi occurs, flowing like a stream, one by one, within one's being? It occurs on the object aramane. And for Vipassana, the object, there are fields of observation. There are like large fields of observation within which there's observable objects arising. And what it's like is, if we have a farm and we have different plots within, we have a lot of farmland, and this is just one big field, but within that there are smaller fields of different types of crops. And Sayadaw mentioned about how rice is planted, that within one large area where rice is planted, there are smaller squares that are marked off by, I can't think of the word, but you can see it. And these little squares within the whole big area that is planted for rice are like the objects within the large field of observation, the individual objects that one can observe. within the bigger picture. So, for example, one puts one's mind on the abdomen to observe the rising and the falling, and putting the mind on the abdomen rises and there's stiffness, or there's tension, or there's vibration. These are all individual objects that can be seen. And then there's relaxation or stillness because of the falling. Lifting, moving, placing, each of these two have things that can be observed when we put our mind on them. So these are called object in English, or aramana in Pali. So Khanika Samadhi flows like a river or a stream when it is placed on every newly arising object. And only if it is flowing like a river or a stream. And that only if means that this, it must, for the mind, for Khanika Samadhi to be able to make the mind stable so that it is calm and unshakable by the nivaranas, the condition for that to happen is that the Khanika Samadhi must flow continuously like a stream of water. So if we say that Khanika Samadhi must occur on every newly arising object in order for the mind to be unshakable, then that means only if the Khanika Samadhi is occurring in this way. So it has to be continuous. If one thinks about a river or a stream, if the stream keeps on getting cut off, then we can't say that it is flowing. If the flow of the stream is being stopped periodically, then it's not a flowing river. It's not flowing continuously. And the word to describe how Khanika Samadhi needs to be is pavatamano, which means continuously occurring without a break on every new arising object. So only if Khanika Samadhi occurs in this way can it make the mind unshakable. If there are gaps in the Samadhi, then this is not continuously occurring. This is not what is meant by pavatamano, or flowing. So it's said that it has to be nirantaran. Antara means gap. Nirantara means that there is no gap. So there can't be any gap between one moment of samadhi and the next. So if one notes the first object that arises and then misses the next, and then notes another and stops, and then notes another and stops, then this Khanika Samadhi is not occurring continuously. One has to observe the object one after another without any gap. So if the Khanika Samadhi has gaps, then it doesn't become Khanika Samadhi. But only if it occurs one by one without a gap, without anything else happening in between, can it become powerful. So if we have a pot, an empty pot, which does not have any holes in it, and from above there's a drop of water dropping directly into that pot, second by second. One little drop of water is not much. But as long as that drop keeps on falling directly into the pot has no hole in it, so the water is going to fill up gradually, drop by drop. Eventually it will get full. First 1/4, then 1/2, and so on. So even though one individual drop isn't much, that pot is sure to get filled up by the water dropping. Or one can think about strands of fiber, like cotton fiber, that can be made into a rope. Oh, an individual strand may be fine, and each strand could be broken pretty easily. Of course, nylon is not that easy to break, but when thinking about cotton, for example, if one winds the strands together, one and two and three and so on, if one winds a group of fibers together, one can make quite a strong rope, and this rope can even be used to pull something heavy, like a boat. So, although one strand of fiber is not very much, individually it doesn't have much strength. But when it is put together, wound properly, together with many other strands, they're all put together closely together, then together they become quite strong. So in the practice, one noting also is not very much. It doesn't have much strength individually. But when our notings are continuous, when observation is continuous, then mental power becomes quite strong. So if one wants one's mind to become strong, then what one has to do is make one observation, one noting, follow another one, time and again. So, as Sayadaw mentioned, one moment of noting does not contain very much power. But when one moment and the next, and the next, and the next occur continuously without any gap in between them, then strong power is developed, and it's quite amazing how strong the mind's power becomes. So only when one develops this type of continuity will one be able to make one's bhavana mind free of disturbances and steady. So for Vipassana Jhana, to develop Vipassana Jhana, one has to make effort to observe every newly arising object, starting with the rising and the falling every time they arise. Sitting and touching too can be used. And in walking, one has to observe every lifting, moving, placing, standing, turning. And when one bends one's arms or hands or looks, blinks the eyes and so on, one has to observe these objects exactly when they happen. After the object has already arisen, it's no longer definite. And before it's arisen, it's not there. So one can't note either what is already gone or what hasn't yet arisen. Only the presently arising object is what is definite, is what is sure. So one has to observe the presently arising object, not the past and not the future. And for observation, one has to apply ardent effort and accurate aim. Aim makes the mind focused, and only if these two factors are present will our work become effective. The ardent effort to get the mind there and the aim, so that the mind is focused accurately on the object. So at first we have to work to develop skill. We have to practice our aiming. Just like when we learn to play a sport that involves something like throwing at a target. So we have to practice aiming and in making effort, And then, when our aim becomes accurate, the mind contacts the object, stays with it. Basically, our observation becomes effective. So the quality of vichara is what makes the mind stay with the object from beginning to end, as though it's rubbing against the object. And to the extent that our aim is good and accurate, the quality of vichara will be good. So the mind will then be concurrent with the object and our noting will be effective. So these two factors of vitakka, aiming, and vichara, sustaining the mind on the object or rubbing against the object, are extremely important. So vitakka is not thinking about the object, it's actually when the object arises, aiming the mind at it. So with effort and aim, with accurate aim, vichara is sure to arise. The mind is sure to become concurrent with the object. And when that happens, we become definite about the object, and this makes us feel joy. Feeling joy, then there's following on that happiness and peace, and the mind becomes calm. So for jhana, this is the most important factor to develop. And in Vipassana, jhana 2, we need to make the mind calm like this, starting out with applying vitakka and vichara. So it is not only samatha samadhi, which can make the mind stable and undisturbed on the object of concentration, the conceptual object, but so too khanika samadhi, when it occurs flowing like a river, occurring without a gap on the arising object, it too makes the mind unshakable on the object. So what are the powers that are involved when this khanika samadhi arises? There's the power of vitakka, or aiming, the power of vichara, rubbing against the object, sustaining the mind on the object, the power of piti, joy, sukha, happiness. And only when these factors are complete will the mind become stable with ekaggata, or one-pointedness. And this is Vipassana jhana. What is it that ekaggata does? It dispels, it doesn't let the mind go to sense objects. So because one's khanika samadhi is good, there's no thought of sense objects. So no kama vitakka, no gyabhara vitakka, no mecha vitakka. The obstacle to concentration of sense desire, kama chanda, is eliminated, and this makes the mind calm. So this is what ekaggata does. And vitakka makes the mind fresh, this aiming. So instead of becoming shrunken, withered with tina and mida, sloth and torpor, vitakka is making the mind fresh, and this also makes the mind stable. Vichara makes the mind definite, because with accurate aim, the mind becomes concurrent with the object through the quality of vichara. And so the mind knows when it falls on stiffness, it knows stiffness. It knows that there's tension or relaxation. So it sees these objects definitely. So, and therefore this indecisive wavering of vicikiccha is being eliminated. So when there's no movement due to this wavering quality, then the mind becomes calm. So vichara helps to make the mind unshakable. Nechalang, chitang nechalang tapeti is what this samadhi does. And piti, or joy, doesn't permit any rotten mind to come in. The rotten mind of vyabhada can manifest as dissatisfaction. One is dissatisfied with the practice. One is dissatisfied with one's meditation teacher. One is dissatisfied with other yogis. But when joy is there, then this factor cannot exist of the factor of dissatisfaction or the rotten mind. And therefore the mind becomes stable and calm with the presence of piti, or joy, the jhanic factor. And following on joy, there's happiness, or sukha. With sukha, there will be no scattering of the mind. The mind won't become separated from the object, no letting the mind go, and no regret or remorse. So these factors arise, and this is undeniable. This is what happens in the practice. These factors arise and they make the mind stable. They make it so that it does not shake due to the opposing powers called the nivaranas. So if one is careless about the practice, then one will lose khanika samadhi, momentary concentration, and the nivaranas will rise up and take over. So if in 1 week one has not developed this khanika samadhi, then one can still try. Okay, in 2 weeks one should be able to do it for sure. And if in 3 weeks, if one hasn't been able to develop these jhanic factors through one's practice and develop khanika samadhi, then it doesn't really matter how long one practices. As long as, if one continues in that manner, one won't go anywhere with the practice. But if one works carefully, one can gain these powers in a short time. So Sayadaw urges the yogis to work carefully. And today he has spoken about how Vipassana Samadhi develops and how the 5 jhanic factors overcome the 5 nivaranas, which prevent the wholesome mind, the clean and clear mind from arising, and which weaken knowledge. The factors of jhana, the 5 factors mentioned of vitaka, vichara, piti, sukha, and ekaggata, overcome these obstacles to concentration, and with them, with vipassana jhana, the bhavana mind takes the place of the nivaranas. So Sayadaw hopes that the yogis will try to develop these factors and to see the Dhamma. Because with Vipassana jhana, one will come to see the Dhamma. And if one sees the Dhamma, one will then come to see the Buddha who taught it. So Sayadaw hopes that you will be able to try, understanding the value of a single moment of observation and putting together as many moments continuously as possible. So he hopes that you will be able to do this. That's all for today.